welcome all of you very formally to this Foundation Day lecture, the first Foundation Day lecture. Today is 7th February, 14 years back. We registered the DISHA Global Society. We'll go into that later. Now we are entering the 15th year, and we want to, in fact, reactivate the activities of DISHA Global. I thought that, and also start this annual event of Foundation Day lectures. I could immediately think of, I know many would have been happy to join. If, I would have been happy to invite many others, but I thought first name that came to my mind, maybe that, call me biased or whatever. It is Professor Som Naidu's name. We worked for 20 years together in the area of educational technology, instructional design. When I met him first in Vancouver in my office, Som was brought in by another colleague to my cabin, and I hadn't seen him before that. I had read articles written by him on designing and constructivism, the Grove cycle, and all these. Those things he used to write at that time. I was quite influenced by those writings. So he said, they said that this is Som Naidu. So I said, I know him. He said, so he asked, have you met earlier? I said, no, we haven't met, but I know you. So that's where it began. And then we did a lot of things. And so we thought of having him today for the first Foundation Day lecture. I welcome all of you. I can see many colleagues are earlier who worked in the project. Many projects in the Commonwealth and later in with other organizations. Also, Commonwealth of Learning and other organizations have joined us. I expect participation from not only South Asia, but also Southeast Asia, Malaysia, and Australia. Of course, our speaker is from Australia. And also, 3-4 people wanted to join from the US as well as Canada, but unfortunately the timing is so inconvenient to them. So then I told them that that we will send you the recording of this because it's 1 o'clock. That is one person wanted from Albany in New York. Professor Pushanathan's student, he is PhD student. She wanted to join, but it is 1 a.m. in the morning. I said, don't do that. We will send you the recordings later. So here we are. Now, without taking more time, I again welcome. There are people joining. I think the number is increasing. By the time the talk starts, I think I expect more people to join. Rama, I can see you now, your face, and Anita from Chennai has joined. She is one of the DISHA Global members itself. So she's there. So without taking more time, and Bashir, you are there from the mentoring hub. I can see. I cannot see your face, but I can see your name. Welcome to welcome to the program. So let me stop here and then go into the formal welcoming of and introduction of the speaker, and then getting into the talk. Thank you. The first DISHA Global Foundation Day lecture. I welcome all of you to this lecture today, and today's lecture will be delivered by Professor Som Naidu from Melbourne. He is a well-known educational technologist and specialist in distance learning, open distance learning, and digital learning. Today, 7th February, is the Foundation Day of DISHA Global Trust. The trust was registered in 2007 in Cochin as a non-profit, non-governmental organization. Since then, we have been working in various areas of development. DISHA actually is a synonym for developmental initiatives for societal and human advancement. 2007 was the birth centenary of Rachel Carson, the famous American marine biologist and conservationist, and the author of the famous book Silent Spring. This book and other writings are credited with advancing the global environmental movement. We thought this is the right occasion to register DISHA Global Trust, which will be working in the area of development. Some of us working in different professions came together and decided that we should be contributing to the development of the society, mainly based on our own expertise and professional competence in our own areas. Uh, so we wanted to call that as the professional social responsibility. In the last 14 years, DISHA Global has been focusing in four areas: BG Academic, BG Welfare, BG Productions, and BG Extension. Most of our work come under our academic area because we are academics. We do conduct training programs, seminars, do conduct research, and support academic activities in various development sectors. We are also involved in welfare and relief activities, especially when there is a issue, there is a problem in the society, there is a disaster in the society, or people need help. We do come in and then provide support. We have also been producing videos and publishing books related to development, and we do that under the banner of DG Productions. And above all, we also have adopted a few institutions, schools, which we support as part of our extension activities. This slide presents and shows some of our activities during the last 14 years. DISHA Global is completing 14 years of its functioning today, and starting of the 15th year, we are starting a new annual event, Foundation Day Lectures. The first Foundation Day lecture today is being delivered by Professor Dr. Som Naidu from Melbourne. Professor Som Naidu holds a doctoral degree in educational technology from Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. He was president of the Open Distance Learning Association of Australia, and he has been executive editor of its journal, Distance Education, for the last 23 years. The Open University of Sri Lanka awarded Dr. Naidu an honorary D.Litt in May 2014 for his contributions in the area of open distance education. Recently, in July 2020, Advanced Higher Education UK admitted Dr. Naidu as a Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, PFHEA. Till recently, Dr. Naidu was Vice Chancellor, Flexible Learning, and Director of the Center for Flexible Learning at the University of South Pacific, USP. And previously, he has held several academic positions in Australian universities, including University of Melbourne, Swinburne University of Technology, Charles Sturt University, and the University of Southern Queensland. So, Professor Naidu, I call him Som, my friend. I have worked with him for the last 20 years in several projects. So, Som, now I am inviting you to deliver today's Foundation Day lecture.
Well, hello there. Greetings, my friends, from Melbourne, Australia, and I hope you're all well and safe at this time, and looking forward to the next couple of hours as part of this conversation. Mohan, thank you very much for inviting me to kickstart this series of seminars on behalf of DISHA Global. I'm delighted to be able to do so. When Mohan approached with this idea of an inaugural lecture for DISHA Global, a couple of ideas came to mind, and there were a couple of possible topics which we threshed out amongst ourselves. In the end, we decided to settle on a topic that needs, we thought, some serious attention at this time. And obviously this has to do with one basic question, which is how prepared are we? How ready are we for leading learning for tomorrow? What more needs to be done in preparation for that? Not only as individuals, but mostly as organizations and as senior managers, which is why we thought it important to invite many of you to this conversation. I've titled this presentation with great care, and I would like to add a couple of points to clarify why it is the way it is. The title of today's conversation is Recalibrating Educational Choreographies for Leading Learning for Tomorrow. Two words I would like to emphasize there are recalibration and choreographies. By recalibration, I wanted to highlight the point that we need to re-engineer, rethink the way educational organizations, educational systems are operating. And recalibration means adjusting that, making changes to that. Because without making changes to the way we do our business or we carry out our business, it is unlikely that we are going to be prepared to lead learning for tomorrow. The other important word there is choreographies. Um, and by that, I'm trying to highlight a point about how we are arranging our operations, just as a composer would arrange music in an orchestra, how as educational leaders we are arranging our bits and pieces, our instruments, our operations, in order to lead learning for tomorrow. So the use of those two words, recalibration and choreographies, are very intentional, and I will pick them up later on in the presentation. But at the start of this conversation, I would like to put to you a premise. And the premise is this, which is obvious, that the resilience of modern day universities has never been tested as thoroughly as it has by the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm sure most of you, indeed all of you, will agree with me on that one, because world over, organizations and senior managers are struggling with how to cope with the challenges that COVID-19 has presented us. I want to approach this question or this premise uh, with hindsight of two reports. These two reports are as follows. The first one is by Ernst Young, which was carried out in the Australian context, and then the other one is a report that came out of Georgia Tech called Georgia Tech 2040. And I will talk more specifically about the contributions of these two reports. But let me start with the first one, and this will be the background within which I'm going to raise a whole bunch of issues with you. The first one is the Ernst Young report, which was carried out not too long ago, but obviously before the COVID-19 crisis, in the Australian context, whereby it looked at the university of the future and posed the question, can the universities of today lead learning for tomorrow? Which is where I got the idea of the title of the presentation. Now, here is an excerpt or a point, a key point that came out of the report that I would like to put to you foremost and ask you this question. Is this true for you as well? Now, the report, the Ernst Young report, say that Australia's universities are monolithic institutions. Note the words, monolithic institutions that control all aspects of their teaching and research activities, anchored by physical spaces and time-bound schedule. Digital transformation is challenging this dominant model. As universities evolve from faculty-centered to learning-centric institutions, they may well find it necessary to unbundle their many functions as well as the degree programs to differentiate and maintain competitive advantage. So the key words there are monolithic institutions. Serious indictment, you might add. Anchored by physical spaces and time-bound schedule, and the influence of digital transformation. Faculty-centered, academic staff-centered to learning-centric institutions. Remember, there's a difference between learner-centric and learning-centric institutions. The focus on the process as opposed to the person. The question then I would like you to ponder or mull over during this presentation as well as after it. Is this true for you as well? Is this true for Indian organizations, Indian universities, or universities in your region, or those that you're familiar with? But we'll come back to that. When Ernst Young made that kind of an assertion, they were making that on the basis of a whole bunch of drivers, and these are some of the obvious ones. The obvious ones are changing demographics. Now, the population is changing, much younger population, obviously in the developing world, as you will be familiar, but changing demographics in the education sector, that the 18 to 21-year-old, 22-year-old is not the primary student population, that students are now coming back for education who are much older, in the 60s and even in their 70s. Obviously, the socioeconomic climate has changed, and the COVID-19 crisis has really underscored that, even though this report was done before COVID-19. Workforce skills. So people who are in the workforce already require skills on the job. This is not new, but perhaps more intensified as a result of the influence of technology and different kinds of skills that are required in the contemporary workplace. And of course, the science of learning, which hasn't changed fundamentally, but perhaps we are paying a lot more attention to it now than we have paid before. So these are some of the drivers that are causing those kinds of claims that the Ernst Young report was making about Australian universities. And alongside that, what are the kinds of forces that are impacting the university sector? At least in the Australian context, it was suggesting that, like I say, in terms of drivers, there's a rise of continuous learning. People want to learn continuously, not just when they're 18 to 22 or so, but thereafter, because there's a need to do so. The work situation is changing, so they're required to be learning. There's a blurring of industry boundaries so that a different set of skills are required as opposed to just one set of skills that might have been required if you were a lawyer or an accountant or a banker. Of course, the technology is influencing a lot of this in the workplace as well. And there's international competition. So these factors are influencing the Australian university sector. There are other drivers as well. COVID-19 is the obvious one. And if you listen to the folks like Bill Gates and Dr. Fauci in the US, you will know that many people are suggesting that COVID-19 is not the end of the story. Things like this are likely to happen again in the future. Are we prepared for that? And how prepared we are for that? But then in countries like the Pacific, where I am right now, and India and Africa, we are very familiar and becoming increasingly affected by large-scale fires, droughts, extended periods of drought, and flooding and cyclone, not to mention earthquakes and those sorts of calamities. So there are other drivers that we need to think about which can have sustained impact on how our education systems operate. How prepared are we if these kinds of things go on for extended period of times and disrupt the way we live? I use the word disruption again very intentionally, and again, in this case, the Ernst Young report highlighted that this kind of disruption to the education system uh, can happen in so many different ways. So if you look at this image that I've taken out of the report, you see on the left-hand side there are markers such as how do universities create value, how do universities deliver value, and how do universities capture value. In other words, you might say things like capture value is undertaking research, and delivery is talking about learning and teaching, uh, and of course create value is again referring to how universities make a contribution to the society, to the knowledge base by way of its scholarly activities, including research. And then if you look at it further down the image, who are our customers? What are the jobs? So if you want to look at where the disruption is likely to be, let's just work through this. So in the case of who are our customers, not long ago, I was just suggesting that one of the drivers is that different kinds of uh, groups of people will be coming back to the university. So this is not the 18 to 22-year-old. Uh, uh, there will be other people. There'll be adult learners and perhaps younger learners wanting to get into the sector, and people from industry without having to leave their jobs. Uh, what are the jobs, and what are the jobs to be done for customers? So apart from doing the usual things that the universities have been doing, enabling people to learn more flexibly is probably going to be on the rise, and COVID-19 has proven that, uh, despite um, despite all our assertions that this is going to be something that we should be embarking on long before COVID-19 struck. Um, what products and services are we providing? Universities are providing. So it's not just postgraduate degrees or undergraduate degrees, but micro-credentials, courses, units, or papers, is whatever you might call it. People would like to do one or two things to beef up their skills, to upskill themselves, without having to undertake extended period of work or study over 3 to 4 to 5 years, because once you've got there, then people would want to top up their core competencies with refresher courses, if I can put it that way. So you should be asking, we should be asking how prepared universities are to provide that kind of service, or are we saying for that kind of work or study, students need to go someplace else? If you do, then you are not meeting the expectations and the demands of the student population. How do customers get our services? So the campus is not the only place, that is going to change. And obviously, as you know, online learning, virtual learning, and the use of artificial intelligence are all going to play a bigger part in this scenario. How do we produce it? The development of content. Universities spend a lot of time in developing content, researching and writing and producing content. But with the expansion of OER, you might like to argue that a lot of the core content may not need to be developed over and over again by everyone. Some things are fixed, some things we know are not going to change. And these kinds of things can be uh, used over and over again, with, of course, embellishments and enhancements as necessary. How do we distribute it? So, as I was saying, the physical campus is not the only go-to place. That kind of educational affordance can be provided in so many different ways, including online learning and distributed learning, as we will talk about in a little while in more detail. How do we support it? So student services, these are the things that are going to be impacted, and how we use technology to support student services. Again, we'll come back to this in a wee bit. What are our key partners? Who are our key partners and suppliers? Well, other universities, governments, industry, and other providers as well. What are our major investments? So is the infrastructure your major investment, or technology, online learning technologies, online learning management systems, for example? What is our revenue model? Again, that needs to be considered. Is it just government fee-based or government grants, or will universities be required to go and seek funding from donors as well as commercial organizations? So this image kind of gives us a snapshot of where the disruptions are likely to be. So always keeping in at the back of your mind, our minds rather, um, how prepared are our universities that we're looking at right now in your context, for how ready are they for this kind of disruption? Um, Now, so that was the Ernest Young report, the findings of some of the key findings of the Ernest Young report. Now, there was this other report that I was referring to, the Georgia Tech 2040, which is also very, very timely and topical, that I would like to use to underscore some of the points that I'm making. And in this report, I thought that this was a very potent excerpt that we needed to pay some attention to. It says the business of national and international education is rapidly changing. The old models of business pedagogy and mission are either being questioned or are no longer valid, meaning we must continuously assess and reassess our own methodologies. Issues of flat word connectivity, technology, and accessibility, affordability, and return on investment, and a diversifying body of learners drive today's higher education model, all while the old funding model becomes obsolete. Not dissimilar to what the Ernest Young report was highlighting, that the funding model of a lot of our university systems um, are probably not aligned as well as they should be for leading learning for tomorrow. And of course, the business models are changing, but we will again visit the point. One of the things that is really driving a lot of that kind of thinking is this idea of the 60 years of higher education. We'll call it 70 if you want to think. What it's basically saying is that education is no longer higher education is no longer the domain of the 18 to 24-year-old. That higher education is something that we'll be looking to throughout our lives. So we'll be learning for 60 years or 70 years, as long as we're able to, health-wise. So this idea that college education is over after 4 years of bachelor's degree, or a bit longer than with masters or PhDs, is so passé, uh, um, that people are going to look for higher education throughout their lives. Hence this notion of 60 years of higher education. So the key questions that I want to highlight for us as part of this conversation is, how ready are we for that kind of disruption that I was just painting, based on the two reports that have come out recently in the last 2 years. And let me articulate those in a bit more detail. The first one is this: how are contemporary universities restructuring or not structuring for a future-focused education? What kinds of structural organizations universities are making or not making? How are contemporary universities rethinking, redesigning? See, I use these words very, very carefully. Rethinking, redesigning their institutional structures, choreographies, like I was saying earlier on, and programs to meet those kinds of challenges, to meet those kinds of disruptive forces. How are contemporary universities defining their places as higher education institutions in a diverse and competitive environment? Here's my thesis then. This is what I'm saying. This is what I'm claiming. That for a future-focused education, a rethink and recalibration of educational as well as institutional choreographies is required. So a rethink is absolutely important, number one, but we need to do that rethinking a lot more carefully, which means recalibrating, which means adjusting the way our machinery works, the university machinery work, the teaching and learning operations work, who is responsible for what. Because the campus-based learning and teaching is not likely to be the main source of learning and teaching for the future. And how we are going to orchestrate those operations. And this is why I'm using words like choreographies, so that careful design of those kinds of operations will be necessary to achieve and meet the demands of the sorts that we were talking about, and these two reports have been talking about. So here's my thesis, that is my claim, that unless we do this kind of rethinking and recalibration of institutional choreographies, I'm talking about educational as well as institutional. What I mean by educational choreographies is those that are aligned with learning and teaching. Institutional choreographies are those that are more operational and structural in terms of, let's say, how our faculty is organized, our schools are organized, or our student services are organized. So we need to focus both on educational as well as institutional choreography. The OER University is not the only idea that is in town. This kind of a future-focused university scenario, then they have to be driven by this, and I think that's the first place we should be going. But policy development, obviously, as I was saying, is the starting point. And they need to capture some of the nuances of how the future focused education should look like. One of the things that I want to spend some time on as part of this conversation is this whole idea of mediation. And mediation is not simply between the student and the teacher, or the student and the student, but a whole range of ways. And mediation can take place in a variety of ways. Articulate a bunch of those, particularly in relation to the growth of online learning. As you will see from this image, 2 out of 3 academic leaders in the North American setting, in this case, are suggesting that online education is critical to the long-term survival. So I think the writing is on the wall there as far as online education is concerned, and COVID-19 has proven the point that I think online education is going to be on the rise. It's going to grow. The need for online education is going to grow. Uh, but online education is not simply a question of, presentation of content online by the academics and the engagement of students with their content. One could think of mediation and communication in the online environment in a variety of ways. Let's look at this quadrant here. You could have a situation whereby people are studying at their own pace, but are not online. But they're looking at online resources. So let's imagine a student who is, for example, in the library, sitting at the library, connected um, and not connected at all to anything, just simply studying by themselves. This is many times uh, in which you and I have been doing this ourselves. And then you have self-paced learning online, in which, for example, a student could be studying at their own pace, in own time, but connected to some sort of a database, connected to some sort of a learning environment, but by themselves. So in these two situations, people would be studying by themselves, but then people are studying or working in group-based situations as well. Now you could have people studying in groups, but connected to one another at the same time. using Zoom or other kinds of technologies. So they're working synchronously at the same time, and there are times when people need to do that. And there's another one whereby people are studying in groups, collaboratively, cooperatively, but are not connected to one another at the same times, but connected nevertheless, such as with discussion forums and other kinds of tools and technologies asynchronously. So you could have mediation, the implications of mediation and communication in a variety of settings, where students, as I said, or people are studying offline by themselves or online by themselves, or synchronously or say asynchronously in group-based settings. When I was talking about the dimensions of mediation, interaction about this kind of a control is dispersed, and as such distributed, hence the term distributed learning. And where learners and teachers and their learning resources could be located anywhere, so that this goes back to the idea of the OER university, that resources could be located elsewhere, not necessarily in the person or in the university that the students are studying. And this image is a clear illustration of how that might play out. Traditionally, for example, and many of you might have seen this, the academic used to provide all the all the services in terms of designing the course, teaching the course, assessing students, and conducting research. But in a distributed learning and teaching environment, and as many of us will be familiar with, such as is the case with open universities and distance education universities, the courses are designed by teams of experts, multiple subject matter experts, educational technologists, and media producers. And courses are delivered, I hate the term delivery, but courses are executed or implemented by different people other than those who might have developed it. And students are assessed and feedback provided by, again, a different set of people. And research is, again, carried out by different sorts of people. So the idea of distributed education is dismantling, is untangling the way the universities used to carry out their business. This is what I mean by rethinking your choreographies. This is what I mean by orchestration or reorchestration or rethinking of our educational choreographies and institutional choreographies, moving from the conventional model of the traditional professor as the source of everything to a more disaggregated model whereby a whole variety of people are involved in the process, which has the advantage. And obviously some of the advantages have to do with implications for learning and teaching and assessment. Naturally, the separation of the components of the learning and teaching and credentialing process, potentially separating course design and development, delivery support, assessment, and as credentialing, as I was saying, which will allow learners to select their own providers of content. So if they don't find a particular content in one place, they can go to some other place and get that content. And they can seek mentoring from other places as well, not necessarily the university. Of course, this, and I think we need to think about that. And I will come to that in a minute when we talk about how mentoring can be provided as opposed to that which is available on the campus, and how professional bodies relate to that kind of thing, because some professional bodies, for example, law, those in the legal fraternity and accounting, are very particular about how these things are carried out in terms of their compliance with the professional accreditation agencies. So while there are advantages of disaggregated teaching and learning, it releases the subject matter expert from carrying out some of the functions that they're probably not very good at, such as the use of technology, enabling academic staff to concentrate on other things, and rationalizing teaching tasks. There are challenges of this kind of distributed teaching. It requires a shift in the mindset. You know, teachers are very, academics are very particular about their subject matter expertise because that's their product. Intellectual capacity, intellectual capability is what they sell and what they profess to be good at. And you take that power away from academics and distribute it, you're taking control away from this idea of my classroom to the classroom. When you talk to academics, people will talk about my course, my classroom. Now, if you threaten that perception, then academics become resistant. Teachers become very concerned about that, and in some cases, rightly so, because there's a fear that some of that quality could be watered down or made less of a lower quality. So I think we need to be very careful about that. Uh, a different kind of course design, which academics are not familiar with. Academics are often very comfortable in their own skin, but not very comfortable with talking about the subject matter with other people when it comes to actually teaching it. Uh, and of course, you know, the availability of technology, network communication infrastructure is critical to that. Um, the costs of that are manifold, and I think we need to spend some time on that. If distributed learning is going to work, then the universities and institutions will have to rethink how they are going to be organized, because it will have implications on several fronts. Greater flexibility, one could argue, offers, of course, more personalization, but more personalization of learning means more time per learner. Not necessarily so, but without careful design, it would mean more time by the teacher or the tutor for each learner. And personalization, therefore, has its costs um, for both the teaching and the teaching support staff. Access to technology is very important if you're going to have distributed learning, because without it, without reliable infrastructure, and you will be very familiar with it yourselves, um, it's not going to work. It's going to fall apart. And if technology gets in the way, then there's going to be a lot of frustration and disappointment and dropouts. So we have to think about that. And as distance educators, we are very familiar with those kinds of challenges. Professional development of academic staff and students included are very important, because it's a very different kind of learning and teaching mindset that we will be embarking onto. So getting the mixture right between how much structure and guidance is going to be important. And this is not new, you know. You'll be very familiar with some of the work that Sir John Daniel has done around way back in the 70s around getting the mixture right uh, between independence and interaction. How much interaction do you provide uh, with impunity, so that it doesn't kill the teacher with so much workload that it's unbearable for them to sustain it. So it means a rethink and reconsideration of how tertiary teachers see their work, how they're recruited, how their professional development is pursued, and how they're supported. Because without all of that, and this is a very key point, without professional development of academic staff, and this is where the 60-year education thing comes in. So don't assume that once an academic has achieved a PhD and starts teaching, that they know how to do everything. We will have to, organizations will have to actually continue to support and educate these academics throughout their lifetimes about new and innovative ways of teaching and learning, because that landscape is going to change all the time, because the technology is going to change all the time. The technologies, even those that are available even now, will become outdated or become less relevant in 10 years' time. So how are we going to upskill or continue to upskill our teachers and our students. So professional development of teachers, as well as the the, the upskilling of students for this new kind of learning and teaching environment is going to be critical. Without it, it's not going to work. Clearly, then, what I'm suggesting is that there's a need for a fundamental shift in the way we think about organizations and how organizations, educational organizations, carry out the business. But mind you, and I'm the first one to say this, and let me take some time to say this, that I don't think that the education system is broken. Everywhere in the world, I think that there's a lot of good work going on. There are lots of examples of great practices, and I'm sure you can point them out. We know them. We know where they are. We know who's doing it and who's not doing it as well. But what I'm complaining about, what I'm arguing against, is that I don't think that's happening enough, and not happening enough at an institutional level. Individuals are doing great things in their courses. Students are doing great things in their learning experiences. But we need to scale this out. We need to make the good things even bigger and better, as opposed to keeping them localized and in these on sort of margins of mainstream practices. And this is the most potent of challenges facing an enterprise-wide rethink of educational and institutional choreographies. We know that there's great practices going on right in your doorstep. You'll be familiar with it. I'm sure you'll love to tell me about it. But the challenge that I think organizations and we're facing is how to scale those things out. You will find that a lot of people are doing great things. You yourself would have done great things with technology-enhanced learning in your organizations or as part of your experiences. But oftentimes you will agree with me is that these things are sitting on the periphery without real institutional impact. And people are dibbling and dabbling with it. For example, MOOCs is a classic case. People would love the idea of MOOCs because they want to promote their brand. Stanford University, MIT jumped onto the MOOC idea. Why do you think that? Because they thought, oh, we can now promote our brand throughout the world and attract more students. Perhaps if 1% of the number of people who register in MOOCs decided to register full time, they would have still won in terms of the numbers. So what I'm saying is many of the institutions are attracted to the idea of open, online, and technology, but they're not willing to change their core business model. And unless you change your core business model, which has to do with time mindsets as well, you are not going to be able to be competitive in the world. So the question then, towards the end of my presentation, is I would like to borrow some words from William Butler Yeats, and you'll be familiar with the poem that he wrote, The Second Coming, some time ago. Can the center hold? And the center in this case refers to the education environment that we are familiar with. How is it likely to change? Think about these questions. If not, what do you think the educational organization of the future will look like in that case? Can educational provision be seen as the right or responsibility of a particular type of organization? Could it be that those kinds of organizations can still exist, but we will need different kinds of organizations on the side as well? How critical is the role of the institutional organization in teaching and learning? Or can learning and teaching be sourced by other places? And what are the implications of this for governments? Because education is really the backbone of the future of any nation or the whole world. Because without an educated or skilled workforce, your opportunities are undermined, your opportunities are compromised. So what are the implications of this, all of this that we were talking about for governments, and how governments are funding, and how organizations are funded, and how education is accredited by professional organizations for the award of qualifications that we would need? Okay, guys, let's bring this conversation to a bit of a close. And in order to do that, I thought this slide from the Ernst Young report was going to be very apt. It's a readiness test. It is a disruption readiness self-diagnostic test, to be exact. And it goes a bit like this. Let me read it with you. The exponential advancements we see in technology today are only going to accelerate. We agree with that? To seize the upside of disruption, universities, institutions, and we must take risks and invest in a disruption agenda, even as they continue to focus initiatives that will keep them competitive in the near to medium term. Standing still is no longer an option. So there are 10 questions as part of this test, and they're on a scale of yes, maybe, no. So it goes a bit like this. Let's take one at a time. Number one, are you willing to challenge or change your core business model? We talked about the business models before. Are we willing to change or adjust or recalibrate or rethink it? Have you cultivated a culture of yes, we can? How well does the leadership team and the management understand the dynamics of disruption of this type and other types? Is the strategy fit for a digital world? Have you assessed your disruption readiness gaps? How do you compare with your competitors? As incumbent business models change, can you build the capabilities you need, or do you have to buy them, or will you have to buy them from somewhere else? Does your strategy address the need to both achieve near-term objectives and lay the foundations and the groundwork for future disruption? How does your purpose, your goals, your mission inform your disruption readiness agenda? How secure is your funding? Have you assessed your funders' views on disruptions in higher education? Now, here's the point. If the answers to all of these questions, one of these questions, or a few of these questions, is in the maybe or no domain, it's time for a rethink and for a recalibration of choreographies for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Som, for your presentation. Um, Friends, sorry for some problem with the audio. We pre-recorded it, as you could easily see, and that has an advantage in the sense that there was no disruption in between due to connectivity. But the disadvantage seems to be that the audio was not as good as it should be. We will be, of course, sending the recorded version to all of you if you want to refer to that later. But Som is with us online, and we have this open session now. We can, for the next half an hour, 45 minutes, the time that you have questions or observations or whatever views, criticisms or whatever that you have, we can shoot at Som. He is in Melbourne. It will not reach him physically, but surely virtually it will. So please do. So let me open this for discussion. There were 4 questions that he had put towards the end of the presentation, mainly related to how the organizations, what would be the impact of that, and all these. You would have noticed those questions. You may focus on those questions, or if you would like to say whatever you like about the presentation or your own experiences, please go ahead.
Mohan, can I just say something?
Okay, please.
As I was listening to my own presentation, guys, I want to apologize that I think if you make a note of this around slides 14, 15, and 16, the audio is garbled. I don't think I was able to, my explanations of slide 14, 15, and 16 were captured. I don't know what happened. What I did by way of technology was I recorded my voice using PowerPoint, the record feature in PowerPoint. So I think my explanations of slide 14, 15, and 16 were not recorded for some reason. So please pay attention to that, and you can have a look at the slides. And if you would like any commentary on them right now, I can give them back to you. And also the same thing happened around slide 20, 21, and 22. I think my commentary was again not captured. I'm not sure whether Mohan, you picked it up yourself, but I listened to it very carefully along with you, and I found that 14, 15, 16, and 20, 21, and 22 were not explained. So if you want me to go over them, I can, but I'll leave it back with you, Mohan, with regard to the question.
Yeah, so you see, obviously the participants cannot look at the slides now as they are not with them. But if you'd like to tell a few things about those slides and what you really wanted to present, you can do it now. I mean, that's the whole idea of being online, virtually available. I know we also learned from our experience of when we decided to record. There could have been two ways of doing it. One is that you record on a webcam and then get the slides edited and integrated to this later. Probably the audio would have been much better at that time. Maybe, yeah, we made a mistake. We could be doing better next time. That's the whole idea about learning from the problems and then do that things better next time. That's all about a teaching itself. You know, that's what we do in teaching itself. So that can be done. Probably the recording on the slides is not as good as recording in a webcam and then integrating the slides into that. So that's next time. Okay. So, would you like to say something about those missed slides, and then we could come to the observations?
Just very quickly, because I'm sure I would love to hear what other people have to say about what I was saying. Slides 14, 15, and 16 were basically making 2 points that when I was talking about rethinking and recalibration, then I was talking about how organizations need to rethink the way they are organized. And one of those important things is rethinking their entire focus. So you can have a university that is very scholarly and focused on research and scholarship. That is the traditional idea of universities, but modern day universities are doing many other things as well, becoming very commercial and also altruistic. So the Ernst Young report was talking about a variety of university types, that every university doesn't have to be Oxford, Cambridge, or Yale. There are different types of universities, and they have different mission and goals, and so on and so on. And the other important thing was that policies need to be in place, that most universities have very archaic policies. They don't have policies that capture the spirit of flexible learning, open learning, online learning, distance learning, and the use of technology. So unless your policies change, academics are not going to adopt things, you know. Technologies may not be adopted as easily if the policies don't drive the adoption of those technologies. So that was the first set of slides, and I think the slides 20, 21, and 22 are, I think, not so bad. They were basically talking about a move from teacher-centric teaching and learning operation to a more distributed learning and teaching operation. Anyway, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, guys, you know, because I don't want to be going on and on about these things without seeing what you really think is the reality on the ground in your situation, in your context.
Friends, please unmute yourself before you talk. so that you can be heard.
Sir, may I come in, sir? This is Dr. Rajesh.
Yes, please.
Hello. Good morning, sir. And thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for that wonderful talk. It was really an eye-opener on many of the aspects that we are currently dealing with in the distance education system as such. And thank you, Mohan Menon, sir, and DISHA Global for organizing such a wonderful program. There are two aspects that I would like to just throw my insight into. That is basically, so you are talking about this aspect of distributed learning. In the COVID scenario, in the post-COVID scenario, it was expected that technology would indeed be a great disruptive factor. That is, we would be going away from the traditional face-to-face and non-distributed mode to a more distributed mode of teaching and learning. But on the ground, what we are seeing with many institutions in India, and I don't know whether it is a phenomenon across the world, is that the same philosophy that governed face-to-face conventional teaching in the classroom is brought to a wider framework with the help of technology. That is, you are using the same principles, you are going in for a same kind of classroom teaching methodology in many cases, and you are not accepting that distance philosophy or a distributed learning philosophy when it comes to the ground reality. That is one of my observations, and maybe this is because many of the institutions are driven not by an open teaching learning philosophy, but by a traditional mindset. That is one thing that I have observed. What do you suggest would be an alternative to this? What kind of a training or changing attitude can we actually have in these institutions? The second issue that I would like to highlight is that when the educational system in a country is regulated by an overarching authority, that is, universities may have their own freedom, but many of the overall policies are decided by an overarching institution or an authority, then is it easy for a distributed learning perspective to come into play? In many of the countries, you have a body governing educational practices, and as such, maybe even though you may have a large number of liberties within the university framework itself, these may not actually pan out in reality. So, where should the change actually come in? At the institutional level or at a broader level? These are, I don't know whether I have made sense as such, but these are my observations. Thank you for this opportunity.
Shall I respond, Mohan?
Please, sir.
Yeah, Rajesh, one more question, Rajesh. They are very sensible, and I understand them very well. Look, I know the Indian context quite well, but the questions that you ask could be relevant anywhere in the world, and I'd like to hear what other people say. But very quickly, let me just say a couple of things. I think the point about mindset is very, 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 very important, and remember one of the questions in the final slide that Ernest Young was putting forth is, have you created a culture of yes, we can? So I know you can put the blame on central governments or provincial governments or state governments and say, look, they're not allowing us to do this, so therefore we can't do it, and I'm sorry, passing the buck on to other people. I'm saying, look, we have to stop passing the buck on to the other people. You can't fix everything in the world, right? You can't fix everything in India. India is a very complex country, and a jurisdiction. So I would stop, wasting my time on trying to fix the problem in the central administration. Work with what you have. My advice would be to focus on what you can do. So even if the policies are saying that, you have to do X, Y, and Z in terms of learning, teaching, and assessment, but policies can exist at two levels. That the institutional policy, where you actually go about allocating teachers and staff to teaching, the design of your assessment, the provision of feedback, the use of technology at the macro level can be determined by you. And I think that's where you can make the difference. So you try and make where you can make the difference and let the others worry about the other things. I mean, that's the only thing you can do, Rajesh. What else can you do? You can't fix the whole problem.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So, you have still anything to say further, or it's okay? So it's open for others to join. Please give your names do come on the screen, but you can also tell from which institution you are, please.
Yeah, can I come in, please?
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Jana?
Yes.
From
Yes.
AUB, Ambedkar University, Delhi.
Yes. Hi, Som. And good morning. Nice to see you after a long gap, though not physically but virtually. And it's indeed a great presentation, and the conceptualization that you have made is very interesting. After having worked in open distance learning for almost 3 decades in Indira Gandhi National Open University and other organizations, now I am into the face-to-face teaching situation in Ambedkar University, Delhi. And there are many learning experiences for all of us, and particularly for me, I can put it in that way. But I work with the skill development sector. So it was easy, in fact, indeed, it was easy to do something more related to the liberal arts things when it comes to the online learning. Of course, in open distance learning, in skill development, I cannot deny the fact that it cannot be sufficient means for organizing teaching learning process. But what I have seen of my last 2 semesters experience after COVID-19, that things are, though it was much more easy when we have put the students into the face-to-face teaching learning process, but acceptance of this mode by the students, by the learner, is not that easy. And I'm sure that all of my colleagues, those who are engaged in the face-to-face teaching learning situation, they must be having similar kind of challenges. So in that sense, what I found, we have to invent many things in the process of teaching learning process. It is not that you just go on what we used to do in the classroom. The way we used to organize the classroom teaching, same strategy will work in the online. When you talk about distributed learning scenario, I think we have to give lots of freedom, autonomy to the learner, and then bring their experiences, because now, as you said rightly, resources are available or distributed elsewhere also. Only I think we have to play the role of the facilitator rather than getting into the traditional lecturing. I think that's what should be the strategy, as most of us needs to. Then we have to do much more homework before we start organizing our face-to-face or our classroom teaching through the online mode. Because first is reorienting our students, second is reorganizing our learning experiences, and third one is the whole assessment process itself, or obtaining feedback from the student. I think this is what is required. This is a great learning experience for the people like us, those who are practitioner in the open distance learning system and moved into the face-to-face teaching learning situation. This is what I wanted to say. Thank you very much, Som. Thank you very much indeed.
Jana Sahab, lovely to see you, man. You look handsome as ever, and it's been a while.
Thank you.
But more importantly, I think the points that you mentioned really need to be underscored, because those are the lessons that you have learned from working for so many years in open distance learning environments. Because one of the messages of open distance learning is the preparation of course materials. Course materials were not just simply content, but the learning activities, the support, and the orchestration of that. And these are the messages, these are the contributions that the open distance learning universities can offer and provide, particularly at this time and in the future. And I think, nobody is going to lose anything by looking at how open universities around the world, not just in India, have been doing the kind of work that you've been doing. And you rightly point out, and I totally agree with you, that in fact, distributed learning requires a lot more greater attention to detail and greater attention to the learning experience and the learning activities than you do in the classrooms. In the classroom, because you were there in person, you can orchestrate a lot of things on the go. If you see, for example, students are sleeping or students are not behaving well or somebody's not getting something, you can shift gears immediately. That's the advantage of the live classroom lecture. But when you don't have access to that facility, then you have to preempt the kinds of situations that students are likely to be facing in. So you're right that in a distributed learning environment, in an open, flexible learning environment, because of the way we have seen challenges posed by COVID-19, we have to think about all the manifestations that a student is likely to be presented with. So I think the lessons learned by open universities should be listened to very carefully. You don't have to do it exactly the way they've done it, but there are lessons, and good lessons, that we can learn from the experiences of open universities and distance learning and flexible learning by everyone. And I think this is a mindset that we need to change. That, we don't have, the traditional universities shouldn't be saying that, we are high and mighty. We don't want to know anything about distance education because, that's second class or second best. I mean, that's a silly mentality, if I can put it that way. It's a naive mentality. We should be learning from anyone, from anywhere, from anyhow, and what have you got to lose? I think we've got to suck up our pride a little bit and try and be more open, because the challenges that we are facing everyone, whether you're in Stanford, Harvard, or Cambridge University, everybody's in the same boat now, particularly after COVID-19.
Yeah, so we have a question posted by one Dr. Biju Kadina Hill. I'll read out the question. Would you be able to reflect on the overemphasis on the applications and technology tools without giving due emphasis for the methodology and assessment? I think you did bring methodology and assessment, but changing technology without changing the methodology and assessment. I think this is the question. Probably.
Yeah. It's a great question because of that particular reason, that a lot of the times assessment is not within your control to change. Regulators will say that this is the way assessment is, that there'll be 2 assignments or there'll be an examination, and so you can't change that. And I totally get that. I understand that. But let me point to you, when you get access to the slides. Look at slide 27, number 27, mark it down, because in slide number 27, I have tried to articulate 6 or 7 dimensions in which technology can have an impact. For example, without changing assessment, without changing your methodology, how can you use technology to enable learner-content interaction? So this is about interaction. If you think about it, and I'll take my time, a little bit of time on this question because it's an important question. If you think about it, most of our teaching is spent on trying to explain the concepts to the learner. We labor hard and we try and spend hours and hours trying to explain something. Take, for example, calculus or probability or differential equations or biomechanics, any topic, for example. We spend hours and hours trying to explain that to the student, But have we really rarely thought about how we want the student to engage with that content, apart from saying, okay, I've explained it to you, now I'm going to give you a test on it. So you go and learn it, and you come back and see if you understand the content. But that's about the only thing that we do. But if you think about what you want the learner to do with that content, so you could ask the learner to do something about the content, so that, in the examination, they really get the content as opposed to just memorizing the content. So I'm talking about the interaction of the learner with the content. How can the learners interact with that content in different ways so that they really understand it deep down, at a deeper level? Then, of course, there is this interaction between the learner and the teacher, the learner and the learner. And learners' engagement with assessment. So in a nutshell, the answer to that question lies in how you can use technology in a variety of ways to promote interaction of a whole range of types, not just traditional content, traditional interaction between the learners and the teachers, but learners' assessment with learners' interaction with assessment, learners' assessment with the feedback. Let's say, for example, they have done an assessment, be it an assignment, and you have provided feedback. Now, think about how you can provide feedback. You can provide feedback by way of a mark. You might say, a mark is a feedback. If I've given you a 14 out of 20, then you know that you haven't done very well, but you're okay. But you've got 10 out of 20 that you haven't done very well. But that's a very base level of feedback. You could use technology, let's say, for example, to give feedback to that student without creating too much work for you. Just as I did in this presentation, you could have a PowerPoint slide and just speak to it and record it on your computer. So the student actually gets feedback on a particular activity, if it is in the form of a PowerPoint presentation by the student, from you. So the feedback is about a lot more detailed than just the mark. So, and you can, then you know that the learner has a different way of interacting with the feedback. They can listen to the feedback, they can listen multiple times, they can come back and ask you questions, all at the same time, making sure that you don't overwork yourself. So technology can take some of that burden away, but be careful how you use technology. So what I'm saying is, you're not changing assessment, you're not changing your learning and teaching approach, but you're using technology to make your job easier and the learner's job more engaged. I hope I'm making some sense of that question.
Thank you so much. There are some questions which have come posted here, but I would request if they can directly ask those questions, that would be better. We have one Mustafa Maliyakal with a question. Okay, before that, there is Dr. Lalitha wanting to ask a question. Please, Lalitha.
It was congratulations for the organizers as well as the speaker for the brilliant exposition on reflecting on calibration of the university system, especially from the point of view of teaching and learning. And before I raise some issues, I just want some clarification whether this point was raised or not, because some slides got missed out as you were mentioning. I'm not sure whether the implications for personnel training in terms of curriculum designers, teachers, teacher educators, administrators were also addressed in your presentation. This is one, because of course, any change we always think of the changes in the personnel who will really man the whole change, whatever you have proposed. My personal opinion, although I don't want to be pessimistic, I feel the changes that you have proposed requires a change in the political will. Of course, you were just now mentioning that we are passing on the buck to others, government and all that. But if you need to work on overhauling the entire system, the cosmetic changes at individual level, I just use online education at home, in my department or in my institution. That doesn't work because why I'm feeling pessimistic is, although technological developments and ideas to integrate technology existed earlier, the technology-based learning remained alien to traditional university system. It's only the pandemic like COVID-19 could really make a big dent into our teaching learning process, not only at the higher education level, but also at the school education level. So I just would like to seek your opinion, because the cosmetic changes will not really make anything, because the policies should change, and other changes, whatever you have proposed, have to be implemented. The whole recalibration should be done at the overall level, not at the individual level, what you were mentioning in your previous reaction. Thank you.
I totally agree with you, Lalita. There's no doubt about that. Now, you raised 2 points. The first point is about the professional development of teachers. I totally agree with that. Now, because of the world of learning and teaching is changing so dramatically, and it's likely to change in the future, I did say in my presentation in several points that I think we will have to rethink the way we are training our teachers. So all the bachelor education programs around the country and similar sorts of professional development programs at the certificate level or even postgraduate level will have to rethink, because how could you be training teachers using an outdated methodology yourself? If you are offering a Bachelor of Education and you are not taking into account how learning and teaching is going to change in the future, both with technology and without the use of technology, then of course you are, not doing a good job. You're not serving the teacher trainees well enough to prepare them for the education of the future. So if I were offering a Bachelor of Education program right now, I'd be looking at what we're doing and how we're doing it very carefully. But the buck doesn't end there. As I was saying, like for everybody else, teachers have to keep on upskilling themselves. Lawyers and accountants and so on have to keep on upskilling themselves. If they don't, doctors included, they can't practice. It can't be a situation where you've got your medical degree and then you never upskill yourself. In Australia, for example, you have to keep demonstrating that you're upskilling yourself on a continuous basis to keep your certification. I'm sure it's true in India as well. So teacher training is no different from any kind of professional education. So yes, I'm totally with you on that point. And if I were offering a Bachelor of Education degree, and I'm sure your NCERT and other organizations are on top of this, and they are monitoring how teacher trainees are being equipped to perform in that kind of future-focused environment. And the second point that you make about policy change is well taken. But look, I've traveled in India quite widely, and I know it's a very complex country, and the jurisdiction is very complex as well. So yeah, you're right. Policies have to come from top down. But my presentation is not targeted just to you people, at the grassroots. And this is why I impressed on Amon to invite very senior people like yourself, so that you can have an input into policy development and redevelopment. Somebody's got to have a say, and if I cannot reach the ministries, then you will be able to reach the ministries. And just as I was saying with Rajesh earlier on, that this kind of change is not going to come overnight. We have to we have to start with small change, and DISHA Global is doing it a bit, and so everybody else is doing it a little bit. But if we speak within unison, with one voice, then we are likely to make an impact, at policies at the highest level. And I do not want to believe that, people at the higher levels, and I know many very senior people in India, that they are completely not in sync. They're not in sync with what I'm saying. I think people at the higher level do understand the sorts of things that we are talking about. I mean, how could they not? COVID-19 has made it clear that, we need to rethink, otherwise we won't be able to do business as usual.
Good afternoon, one and all. Sir, this is Resmi Sharma from Sikkim. I don't know, I'm very glad to be here in this your presentation, this session. So I would like to place my suggestion or my viewpoint on this regard in distance education. Like, before pandemic, because as I'm belonging from the small state, Sikkim, of India, but what I feel is distance, education is very important, especially online distance education is very important because there are so many people who are working in business sector, pharmaceutical sectors, private as well as public, but they are not getting authentic or, up to the mark level of online classes or this thing. So what I feel is it is very important to make or develop a policy that will focus those people who are getting problem, though they have very good knowledge. Say for example, like the people who are working in private organization, they are lacking the problem of English speaking. Though they have very good experience and all, but they don't, it's very difficult for them to express their view, their suggestion to their boss or the client or even teacher also. They're having some problem, though they have knowledge, but it's quite difficult for them to share the knowledge in English language or something like that. But after pandemic, what is happening is like there are so many organizations or institutions or private individuals also, they have started giving lectures or some small course kind of content, say for example English speaking course kind of thing. But it is very hard to believe whether that is up to the mark or not, whether if I'm paying also, but it is fake or it is authentic. So it is. So now what I feel is it is very important to implement such kind of policy that every individuals who are working, they can at least have an opportunity to get or to polish their weaknesses, to improve their strength in their weaknesses. So I don't know my viewpoint is correct or not, but this is my view that I share. Thank you very much.
Dr. Som, before you answer, I have something else to add to Reshmi Sharma.
Please do.
As a practitioner, I think we come across a lot of, let's say, unorganized sector. I'm not talking of the big corporates. I'm talking of the micro, small and medium enterprises who actually is finding this very convenient, the methodology of distance education. And there is a lot of opportunities and challenges currently for upskilling them. They are also taking a lot of initiative because now they have a lot of time and they don't have to go and enroll themselves in a school or a college. They may not have the prerequisite qualifications. I think perhaps this is the time when academics or the universities as well as the industry can work closely together. And this perhaps would open up much more vistas and avenues for, from an organization point of view, the organized sector, they will be able to connect with a lot of unorganized sectors who can actually feed them. And from an education sector, this opens up a huge avenue for interacting with and also we are talking of the masses, not just few people who are able to get into a university. I thought Reshmi Sharma had a valid point. Based on a little bit of experience which I had, I thought I will share this with you. Wonderful lecture it was. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Mr. Som Naidu.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Reshmi. Look, there isn't really a question, Reshmi, because I think you were making a point which I totally agree with. Look, I think a lot has to do with changing of mindsets, isn't it? And I think before COVID-19, we could have argued one way or the other whether this is better or that is better. But COVID-19 has been a bit of a shocker for every one of us, whether you're in the UK or whether you're in the US or as far as COVID-19 is concerned, we are all the same, no matter where you are. And I think this has been a reality check for all of us to say, how are we going to be able to cope if this sort of thing arrives again at our doors? Are you prepared for it? So I think this has been a wake-up call, that every organization needs to say, my God, we were sleeping at the wheel, we had to close our shop down. You shouldn't have to close your shop down. You should be flexible and mobile enough to be able to keep your operations alive. Education is not something you can put on hold, isn't it? People's lives are at stake, and people need to be up, because otherwise the whole country is going to suffer eventually. Can you imagine the ripple-on effect that it might have when 2 or 3 years are lost, from one's life, So learning is not something that, it can be left to the classroom, because we know that we can do it in different ways. And so why aren't we doing it in different ways? So what I'm suggesting here is, and I am quite aware of the challenges, what I'm suggesting here is that if there are 49 people here today, if 49 of us go and speak like this with our other colleagues, it's like COVID-19. We will have a multiplier effect, and we will impress on people that policies need to change. But how do policies need to change? We have to have some idea of how policies change or policies can change, and policy change does not arrive in a vacuum. You have to have knowledge of the domain, of the subject matter, or practice, and people amongst yourself, you have that experience. So I would urge you to go on and have this conversation with those guys who are involved in policy development, at the local level, at the medium level, and at the high levels. And change will have to come, because without it, we are not viable. This is not this or that. There is only one path, and that is to move forward. And we have to do that. And I did underscore the point that our policy development is very important. In my experience as a Pro-Vice Chancellor for the last 4 years, I found that policy development is not enough. Once you develop a policy, you need to acculturate that policy with your people. Because you could develop a policy, put it in the books, and if you go and ask somebody in a teaching department about some policy in relation to technology or learning and teaching, they will say, what policy? They might not have even read about it. So you develop a policy and then make sure that you socialize that policy with people on a continuing basis. It's a never-ending job. People forget. So you gotta have those professional development mechanisms in place in institutions whereby policies are developed and continuously being socialized and acculturated with the community, not once, not twice, but on a continuing basis. So every year, new teachers come in, they are inducted into the new policies of the organization and of the state and of the country, and so on, because awareness of those things are critical to how they actually carry out the activities on a day-to-day basis. So it's a very complex activity. But who says it was simple?
So there are yes, please. Who is coming in? Is anybody coming in for that observation?
Yes, sir. Good morning. I work in the office of the CNAG. Hello.
What is CNAG?
That is Comptroller Auditor General of India, sir.
Okay.
I like this term disruption because we have a disruption at very various level. We have restructuring going on, different departments merging. For example, earlier I was working in the office of the principal director of audit scientific department. Then I went to corporate affairs. Now we have a different organization called infrastructure, and we are facing a lot of problem because of restructuring, disruption. And on top of that, we are going to visiting units we have not visited earlier, and they are not digitally ready. So I like this your idea of disruption very much, and I think this can be very useful. Can you suggest how to improve our quality of work, auditing, and how to access the files of the organization which they normally deprive us from? Mohan sir and Manan sir both absolutely remarkable.
Well, this is a question for you, mate. I can't answer that question.
So you, as usual, you pass the buck. Say it is not connected to education directly, but I'm sure that has its relevance in any functioning. Use of technology, use of the various modes of accessing things from outside. Everything cannot be done face to face. I think we always talk about designing your function. How are you going to design it? In a teaching, we'll say it is learning design, the instructional design. Similarly, you may have to really work out your design under the circumstances. How are you going to manage? Because you know very well what are the documents to be accessed, what are the people that you have to, what is to be audited, whom to talk to. I mean, to the extent I don't understand your complete system fully, but I feel that the spirit behind Professor Naidu's presentation is applicable to any context, I would say, because we were focusing on education because we had most of the people were from the field of education. That's all I can say. But you can very well. I will be sharing this presentation with all of you, so you can very well be interacting with others through Professor Som also. Please, thank you, Mr. Digari. Am I right? Yeah.
Sir, so can I ask one question, sir? Sir, really I was trying to compliment with Reshmi Sharma madam because it is totally related with the private involvement, company involvement, technology implications and everything. And sir was giving a specific slide for us for disaggregation of teaching functions. Actually, I want to ask one of my doubts regarding this thing. Sir, especially in this pandemic situation, teachers are seeing this as very convenient to use all the technological interventions which is developed and distributed by others. It's very nice in one sense, but I am thinking that the development of content, teaching aspects, then assessment, then research. Sir was giving the slide as the traditional conventional system, this way following, and in the current situation, in the modern situation, it is a little bit different. We know that everywhere public-private partnership is there. But I have the question that now teachers are becoming very liberal and they are coming in the classrooms very liberally with much liberty because the commitment or the responsibility of developing these systems is by some other people, and easily they can come to the classes without that much expertise in subject, without that much expertise in the technological interventions to transcend pedagogy, and they can easily come to the classes. Sir, I am doubtful that whether this intervention of the private companies and especially they are more profit-seeking people and they are thinking of profits and all. And I think this is a quality compromise from the part of the private people. So definitely that will affect the quality of our higher education system, especially the technologically integrated education system. So I really want to have the comment from Naidu sir on this. So better to have all the expertise from the academics, and the government policy may also have to be framed like that. It is better, I think. So teachers can be the experts in, to some extent. We cannot say that all can, but to some extent. If the policy is framed like that, our system will be developed, and the profit mode and the commercial practice in education will be a little bit minimized to develop the quality, especially the field of research. Madam was telling about pharmaceutical research field and all. I think especially in life science, all the patent and the productive aspects are coming from companies only. So this modernization in segregation and separation, especially desegregation, is compromising your quality. That's
thank you, Dr. Jalajakumari. There is there is another question which was posted earlier by Mr. Mustafa, which touches also the same related to this area, is that though we can have a lot of micro level flexibility, what about digital market and digital corporate fixes the policy? The direction and pace is determined by corporate. What sort of freedom an individual institution or an individual teacher will have in that sort of a context?
Sir, it is muted. Sir,
Mohan, I was just beginning to say that these are very difficult questions to answer. You know, I shudder to even give the impression that I know the answers. But look, let me, because I raised the issue, so let me just see if I can clarify my position on the question. I totally get it that academic standards and quality has to be maintained. Otherwise, where do you draw the line? And this is why we have academic boards. This is why we have examination boards. This is why we have curriculum development groups and organizations. This is why we have NCRT in India, for example, and anywhere in the world. These organizations will ensure what a curriculum should look like. When I'm talking about disaggregation of responsibilities, then I'm talking about disaggregation at a lower level. So let's say, for example, disaggregation is not a discrete entity in terms of a definitive model. Disaggregation can sit on a scale. So you can have disaggregation in a small way, you can have disaggregation on a larger way. So let's say, for example, the open universities in India. Indira Gandhi University, National University, is an example of an extreme distributed learning environment, right? Teaching is taking place in the centers, teaching is taking place away from IGNOU in Delhi, supported by people throughout the country in so many different ways. But some things are set, and these things are the curriculum and the assessment and then the way curriculum is designed. So those things are not negotiable. What is distributed, what is flexible, is what the tutor does at the ground level. So a tutor in, say, Kanpur might be doing something different from a tutor in, say, Hyderabad, or in the same subject, or in the same sort of area. So in your classroom, for example, ma'am, you could have the same content, but you're teaching the same content in that has been developed by your faculty and agreed by your faculty. But the distribution could be that students don't have to confine themselves to a particular textbook. They can go and get an open educational resource that might be available, which they don't have to pay for if they don't have the money to pay for. So there is some flexibility there. So you can't say to the student that if you don't have the Introduction to Psychology textbook, that you can't take this course. That there should be flexibility, that the same content can be sourced from different places and different providers. So distributed learning is not a fixed concept. it is a very nebulous and a very free-flowing, if I can use that word, concept that can be defined in so many different ways. And I want to reiterate the point that academic standard and credibility in terms of accreditation have to be ensured. And this is the job of the professoriate. This is the job of the academic community. And I totally get that. And I'm not suggesting that should be significantly altered other than what is necessary, if I can put it that way. Am I making myself clear?
Yeah, I think that's okay. I think it is already 45 minutes of the session, open session. We can have another 5 minutes. We will have to wind up. I know I would have really liked to discuss this with Som and all of you for another hour, but that's not fair enough. I mean, we probably can do it and later in smaller interactive sessions, which DISHA Global plans to organize on a regular basis. So in different development sectors, not only education. So we will have more opportunities to interact, I suppose. But if there are some questions still that you want to ask, please come forward. I know that some questions were put on the posted in the chat, which I couldn't really bring in here. But if you are there, please, if one or two questions I can take.
Hi, sir.
Yeah.
Hello.
Mr. Bashir from.
Yes,
Yeah.
Sir, the latest issue after the pandemic in the online education, the digital divide has become a bigger subject now. So in terms of devices, the haves and not haves increased. At the same time, the knowing about the online education, greater things are happening in the segment, but many of the people are not knowing about it. So how that divide can be reduced, and also to make the interesting of the education, online education, gamification will be a greater factor. So how we can integrate that into the system, and lacking of, I'm quickly asking so many things, I'm sorry for that. And lack of a pedagogy is another issue we are facing. All these things, how it can be addressed through, and can we do anything, and what will be our contribution, and how can we create more change agents to make it happen?
Yeah, okay. Mr. Bashir is a partner of the mentoring hub of DISHA Global, and we always work together. Thank you, Bashir, for your observation. And Som, please.
Just a quick response. Look, I don't think there's a problem with pedagogy. We know the pedagogy. There's a lot around. We don't have to go around reinventing the pedagogy. Pedagogy hasn't changed for many years. What has changed is the technology. Yeah. And we have been talking quite a bit about the industry. I think we should be pushing pressure on the industry to say, provide low-level, cheap technology so that everybody can have access to it. Look, you can't hold people who have access to technology back because 50% don't have the technology. You can't say that, look, you guys cannot have an iPhone because 20% of our population cannot have an iPhone. You've got to give people, the opportunity to go ahead if they can go ahead. You can't hold an athlete back by saying slow down because your colleagues are slow. You got to say, if you want to go ahead, because my job is to bring the other guys along. So as educators, we need to be putting pressure on the technologies to say, we need you to provide technology so that we can take the other 30% or 40% and bring them up to speed. The world is always going to be uneven. The world is never going to be even. Within India, outside India, it's always going to be uneven. Australia is the same. Tell me about it, right? So that is not an excuse. We don't want to take the digital divide an excuse. We want to push pressure on the on the technologies to say, provide the technology so we can bridge the gap. Yes. And we know the pedagogy. Everybody in this room knows the pedagogy on how to apply technology more effectively. That's not new.
So we will have the last question, and before I wind up.
Hello.
Yes.
Good afternoon. This is NK Das from IGNO.
Yeah, Dr. Naidu, please come in.
Thank you, sir.
We cannot see your face, but I would have liked to see your face. Anyway, doesn't matter. Please come.
Actually, it was a very nice presentation by Professor Naidu. I hope that he may be recognizing me. There are a couple of observations. As you know, during the last 1 year, there has been a shift from the conventional notion of teaching to a digital mode of teaching. Because of this, and majorly this development is attributed to pandemic. But let me think in a different way. Is it that the pandemic has induced this kind of change, or some kind of evolutionary change in the field of technology? Because there was a technology which is apt for this present pandemic situation. Therefore, there was some kind of acceptance of the new technology to get integrated in the teaching learning system. If it is so, perhaps we have to think in terms of the technological advancement vis-a-vis the future teaching learning scenario. Now, the question is what Professor Somnai's thesis is that we are that is going to a reality in the future, and that is going to a new normal in the future, where perhaps technology-induced learning will be the reality. Now, as you know that every time we say that extraordinary situation demands extraordinary provisions, therefore, not only in different fields, in health or the fields, but also in education, that extraordinary provisions are also made in terms of using technology for teaching learning process. Now the question is that it is a kind of situation where we have just jumped into the river without being prepared for it. And now, the scenario for the last 1 year, what I have been observing, and I hope that all of you are observing, that the institutions of higher learning or at the school level, what they are increasingly experiencing, they are just jumped into the scene, but without getting adequate preparedness. This preparedness requires, I put it in a very broad platform. That platform is in terms of intentions. Intentions of whom? Intention at macro level. Intention even institutional level can be vision, mission. Are we going to change our vision and mission statement institutionally or from of India?
I think we will have to wind up. I think we put your idea. Is that okay?
It is structural change. How is the operational change? We have to think this and then prepare ourselves for the future scenario or future normal. Perhaps then the entire perspective can be thought of. This is done what the lecture has been presented by Professor. And of course, the lecture was very, very interesting, fascinating, but it demands, warrants that a lot of preparedness on the part of both government, institution, and informal that is required. So with this very broad observation, I again congratulate both the organizer and the presenter of today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Das. And now I will give to Som for the final conclusion, answering Dr. Das' question as well as conclusion, so that we can wind up. Please. Tom.
Sorry, I missed that. I missed that, Mohan. What did you say?
No, yours is the last word, no? On the top. I will conclude the session at the end, but about the top, you will have the concluding remarks, please.
Look. Thank you very much for the opportunity. That's the first thing I want to say, and I'm thrilled by your attention. So many people came to listen to what I have to say, and that is really an honor, a privilege. And I thank you for giving your time on Monday to be able to do this. And I hope that, I've been able to present a few ideas that you can think about and integrate in your work. That's all I'm asking for, and that's all we can do, is to make small changes with what we are doing. Nobody is asking the world to change. The best thing that I can hope is for you to walk away from this presentation and say, I want to change this. Yes, we can. It's not the technology, it's not the policy, it's not about the government. It's what you can do immediately in the context that you are in to make the smallest of the change. If we do that, then we are on the path to recovery. And so that's my wish, that's my hope, and I thank you for that. Thank you, Maura.
With those last words from the presenter, let us conclude the academic session here. But before I conclude the session, I should thank each one of you. Professor Som, of course, we have been interacting with him for almost a week, and others who joined on a Sunday. We were a little worried whether Sundays will be a suitable time for all, because that's the time for you to have rest. But there are fortunate things in unfortunate time. During COVID time, many of you were at home anyway during the working days also. So anyway, thank you very much for being joining the session. We had to do it today because 7th February is the foundation day of DISHA Global. We couldn't have done on any other day but Sunday. So we hope to have the second one next year, 7th February. Hopefully, if COVID is not there, maybe it won't be online. We will decide at that time. Anyway, thank you all for that. And I should have introduced Mr. Sethu Madhavan, UK. He came in and presented something. He's our vice president of the vice chairperson of DISHA Global, and he is based in Bangalore. Not that all of us are based in Cochin, so we do interact virtually. And this year we have taken a stand that we reactivate and do many things. So let's hope that this will be a good beginning that we are making today. And so nothing more me to say. One more thing is that I can make this recording available to all of you online, by email, so that you can interact with Som later also. So it's virtually you can interact with anybody globally, anywhere in the world. So if DISHA Global has achieved that linking you with Som and those people who knew Som, reminding him that he is still active, and probably he is going to be more active after he retired from his Pro-Vice Chancellor's position in Fiji. So he will be based in Melbourne. In fact, he is the lead of what is known as Technology, Education and Design Associates, where I happen to be a happy member of that. And Dr. Shironika here is also a member in that. And then hopefully we will be working together for more things later. Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.